Good morning, netizens, and welcome to the first day of BCSP's Digital Workshop Series. For those of you who just logged in, you may have missed our fantastic intro video, which talks about or gives you a good idea about who we are, what BCSP stands for. So make sure you look for that in our FB page. BCSP stands for Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines, formerly known as the Wildlife Conservation Society of the Philippines, or WCSP. We have been around since 1993, and today we mark a special event, which is the start of our very first digital workshop series. We also want to acknowledge our partners who have made this event possible. So thank you very much to our sponsors, the Biodiversity Management Bureau, the Team Energy Foundation, Energy Development Corporation, and Crocodilus Porosus Philippines, Incorporated. Here to talk more about BCSP and to formally open our workshop, let us all welcome BCSP's President, Sir Rainier Manalo. Sir, your microphone, please. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you.
Loud and clear, sir. Go ahead.
Good morning to all. Most of us here acknowledge that we prepare for this year's annual Philippine Biodiversity Symposium, but unfortunately, it was postponed in 2021. The BCSP's board member had to rethink for possible venue amid the ongoing health and economic crisis. This first BCSP Biodiversity Online webinar series is a BCSP's response to the community quarantine to provide opportunities for students to share their research projects to an online audience. We must recognize that access to social media platforms like this would be a new normal, not only to keep us safe and healthy, but to ensure that biodiversity conservation be communicated effectively. It is worthy to note that aside from the depressing effect of pandemic, we take home optimistic results in reducing environmental pressures. I would like to encourage our student researchers, conservation educators, and practitioners to offer your best practical actions in providing new solutions for sustainable conservation. Let me take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks for the combined energetic efforts of four BCSP committees: the symposium, mentoring, conservation awareness, and publication, for trying to move this project forward, with special mention to our BCSP Vice President, Ms. Cynthia Layusa Oliveros, our moderator, Mr. Henry Calilong, and BCSP's technical team headed by Michelle Encomienda. To our resource speakers, as our mentors for this Sci Conservation Workshop, Dr. Inez Ponce de Leon, Professor Des Fernandez, and Dr. Lilian Rodriguez, for their commitment of support to BCSP's knowledge platform. Most importantly, on behalf of the BCSP, we express gratitude to our partners, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Biodiversity Management Bureau, Team Energy Foundation Incorporated, Energy Development Corporation, and Crocodilos Porosos Philippines, with whom we have been working closely in order for this digital workshop series to happen. With this, I formally open this online forum, and we look forward to another biodiversity online forum in the near future. See you all in Butuan City next year to the 29th Annual Biodiversity Symposium. Thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you very much, Sir Rainier, for formally opening our digital lecture series. And indeed, the need to conserve and protect our natural resources must go on, even with what we now know as the new normal. And Sir Rainier mentioned an opportunity for student researchers, and I would like to emphasize that so we can all mark that in our calendars, that we have the opportunity to present our research on August 22 to 23. So there, it will be very easy perhaps for every one of us to attend, because there's no need to travel or even to wear pants to that event. so do make sure to make yourself available, and so we can all hear what you have been doing for the preservation of our natural resources. Okay, before we dive into our first talk for the series, okay, let me share with you our house rules. Yes, okay. So if everything runs smoothly, we promise to end in 1.5 hours. So by 11:30, hopefully. Okay. And then each speaker will have 30 to 40 minutes to present, which will be followed by a Q&A. Now, our Q&A, there's a little bit of twist there, because we can no longer address our questions directly live to our speaker. So may I request those interested parties to type in our comment page, in our comment section in FB, your questions, and do include a short introduction of who you are, what you do. Very short. Let's say it's enough to mention that you are a teacher, perhaps from Cebu, or you are someone working with sea turtles, etc., etc. Okay, and and yours truly, the moderator for this series. I will randomly pick questions from our comment box, and we will present them to our speaker. And rest assured that those questions that have not been answered will be addressed in one form or another by our speaker. Okay, let me remind everyone that this webinar is live and recorded, and it will be shared online. For those of you who are perhaps wondering about certificates, because it has been common practice for BCSP to award certificates for those who complete our annual symposium, don't worry, we will be providing an e-certificate. So everything starts with an E now. So e-certificate, but only for those who complete, okay, our survey before 8 a.m. the following day. So a link to this survey will be announced at the end of the webinar. So watch out for that, please, so that we can claim our e-certificates without any hitches. Okay, so for the first topic of our digital workshop series entitled Conservation, Communicating Conservation in the Age of Social Media, we have our first speaker who hails from the Ateneo, and she will be presenting to us her talk entitled Saysay and SciSci in SciComm. So many Scis. Lessons from the social sciences in giving your science its day in the sun. Okay, this talk will give us an idea how best we can communicate in science, and she will be sharing some ground rules when we speak about science to our audiences. Online for now, but hopefully face to face in the near future. Okay, our speaker for today is the best person to talk about this topic. Okay, she started as a molecular biologist uh, in one of the most complex scientific disciplines, okay, in science, and has decided to specialize in science communication. Okay, her work is very varied, from forensic molecular biology, wildlife conservation genetics, to views of Filipino and American scientists on science communication, and today, with the pandemic, risk communication. Okay, wow. She is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Communication at the Ateneo de Manila University. Okay, if you want to find out more about her and what she does, feel free to visit her site at www.inezpdl.com. Okay, without further ado, let us all welcome Dr. Inez Ponce de Leon.
Hi, and good morning to everybody who is online. Thank you very much for having me, BCSP.
Go ahead, ma'am.
All right, thank you. So I'm Inez Ponce de Leon. I come from the Ateneo, but I'm also a UP Diliman graduate. And like many of you, I am into biodiversity. My undergraduate degree is in molecular biology, so is my master's. And all of these have been built into and have led to my journey in science communication. So today I want to talk about SciSci, meaning, and SciSci. This is a unity of both the social sciences and the bench sciences. When I say bench science, that means your laboratory sciences, your theoretical sciences, your math, even your statistics, all of these sciences coming together in order for us to better understand, better carry out, better execute, better evaluate, and improve science communication no matter where we are in the world. The next slide shows you a wild pig. This was my master's thesis, not this exact pig, but the whole idea of wildlife conservation, genetics, and biodiversity was my master's thesis. So I probably met some of you already in a conference or other, maybe around 10, 15 years ago when I was still in molecular bio. A very short story. When I was in my master's, my job was to do wild pig conservation genetics. So that means I had to look at genetics of the wild pig in the Philippines. I did a lot of PCR. So for those of you who are not in the sciences, you'll hear that a lot nowadays. Polymerase chain reaction. That's a general tool to copy bits and pieces of DNA. And there are lots of applications of PCR. One of them is in conservation, where you make lots of copies of a gene, do a gene sequence, and see how these genes change or don't change across species. In general, you want to have a 98% to 100% match of genes to say things, or sorry, to say animals are of the same species. My thesis found out that two of our wild pig species in the Philippines are distinct and separate. We might have a wild pig species for every single island. So that means for every place that you find a wild pig, you're going to find a different kind of wild pig. For those of us who are in biodiversity, this is fun. This is great information because it tells us that you can't just introduce a pig anywhere. You can't just repopulate a population by, say, importing pigs from Cebu all the way to Iloilo and then expect them to be the same species. That would totally kill the wild pig species on that island because they're just two separate species. To us, that's fun. That's great information. I shared this with someone who was a chef, and the person in Tagalog asked me, so, pag nag-ihaw ako ng baboy damo mula Cebu at ng Iloilo, magkakaiba ba lasa nila? I had to say that all in Tagalog because that's how it sounded to me. It sounded brash. It didn't sound like science at all. And it's not like the science that I'm used to. The science that's in nature or science, these journals that have great empirical data that document the work of scientists. It didn't sound like science to me. So I felt offended because I thought, okay, this is my research. Why don't you appreciate the fact that we have so many different species in the Philippines instead of, just thinking of lechon? But that also opened my mind. And it was one of the many things that opened my mind to how science communication has actually grown. To us in the scientific community, our science is science, nature, journal articles. The science communication that everybody else knows about is pretty much bigger than that. It goes beyond the mere journals. It can talk about blogs, websites, Twitter. If you're familiar with Neil deGrasse Tyson, you'll also know him from the Discovery Channel, from National Geographic. You'll know him as someone who communicates science. More recently, you've had the TED Talks. These are all science communication channels. Now, they're fun, they're online, and if you've seen and participated in Zoom or other places such as StreamYard, Zoom, StreamYard, Google Hangouts, if you've seen all of these online channels and online talks, then you might be familiar with all of these different ways that science is communicated. And we often hear so many buzz phrases about how science should be simplified, how we should have good graphics, how we should have very good speakers. All of these are good. They're good basic ground rules to live on with any kind of communication. But science communication is much bigger than that. It's actually old. It's a very old field that originated in the 1800s with Michael Faraday and his friends when they first thought of bringing science to the non science public. During that time, they decided that people needed to learn more about science through lectures because there wasn't a system of education then. There was no system of standardized education. So they had to share science through a Christmas lecture, through lectures at different fora. They talked about candles and fire and heat and electricity because these were very new, but they were very close to how people saw the world and how people would later understand science. Come World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, science was so well developed, so different, and so distant. People no longer knew that much about science because a lot of it operated in secret. You had laboratories that developed vaccines alongside warfare, alongside weapons. But this also meant that science was so developed and so different and so far away from human experience that it was so difficult to show and to appreciate and understand. But something also changed since the 1800s. Everybody has access to education. Access, not necessarily taking that access. So we still have a lot of people who do not pass through the standard education system. But more people are getting more experience and more education, perhaps more than ever and more than they've ever had since the 1800s. So, what does this mean? This means that if you want to do any kind of science communication, you're also going to need insights from the social sciences, and that includes history, psychology, sociology, and communication. People often make this mistake of communication being labeled as an art. Yes, it's an art, but it's more than that. It's a social science. It takes a lot of theoretical and philosophical frameworks from psychology and sociology, and now this is my field we're talking about. So this is where I get really excited, and I am so sorry if I'm going to start gesturing and dancing around here. But this is what I'm really excited about. Science communication takes psychology, sociology, it takes an empirical, systematic look at the world and at communication. And it goes beyond simply saying science is given to people who don't have it. In today's talk, we are going to look at some of the myths that have been propagated about science communication. And these are common myths, and we've probably used them. We've used some variation of them. And I'll spring off of these myths, and we'll go into the ground rules. Please keep in mind, ground rules doesn't mean that these rules will never ever change. These are just some rules that are good for now. But they're good for all kinds of communication in the sciences, whether you are talking at a conference to your fellow scientists and talking to your friends, or talking to your classmates or schoolmates, or if you're a teacher or professor and talking to your students. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with the myths of science communication. You might think that this is how this is done. So I'm going to run down through the list, and then we'll explore all these assumptions in detail. We'll start with information. Well, we'll start, okay, but no, hold on. We'll start with talking about what these myths are. Number one, all people need is information. Number two, all they need is knowledge or awareness. Number three, if they don't listen, then they're hard headed. And number four, let's just do everything on social media. Let's get started. The first one, you might have heard of this term before. Information is all they need. Okay, let's explore that. Information. Let's talk about knowledge. We might have heard this definition before. Science communication is giving information to those who don't have it. Well, I used to use this term. Science communication was once defined as a way to tell the lay public about science. And sorry, I think we're having a bit of we have a bit of an interruption. Hold on.
Yes, I'm sorry for that. We are experiencing some technical issues with our streaming services.
That's
And
okay. It happens. Yeah.
so maybe it's possible to go back to our AVP while we address the issue. Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to our online series. My apologies. We are really sorry as we learn the ropes of this new normal. Okay, so Mamines, maybe we could continue.
Okay, sure. Oh, darn it. I wish we had started again, but that's okay. All right. So let's go back to the myths of science communication. Thank you so much, by the way, everyone. And yes, the ropes of this new normal are very tattered and very knotted. So bear with us. It is very difficult because there is one thing we cannot control, the internet. We can't control COVID either, but we can't control the internet as well. So I'm glad that everyone is still able to stream and watch as we go through this presentation on science communication. Let's talk about the myths again. So this is a definition that I used to give when I was a science communication baby back in 2003, 2004. Science communication is giving information to those who don't know. When I first heard about this science communication, I was a scientist and I loved working in the laboratory. But that also meant that I was insulated and protected from the world because that's what the laboratory does. It makes you think that you are the only person who knows about your discovery and nobody else. And that the only place where it matters is in the right there, in the right now, and maybe in about a month in the right journal, in the right article. So science is something na kinikim-kim. I hate to say that, but it's something that we protect. We love it. It's our field, but so is everybody else's field. And the thing is, giving information also assumes that those who receive the information, number one, are ignorant and just want information. And all they need is information. And that everyone knows nothing from besides you or aside from you, nobody else knows anything. These assumptions are built into that statement. Read it very carefully. Com is giving information to those who don't know. What we are doing is to create capital out of knowledge, meaning we're making it a commodity and we're turning knowledge into something that people in power have and those in power don't. I'm all for democratizing knowledge, meaning what? Meaning, let's assume or let's think or let's hope that everybody has some form of knowledge about something. Why? Because everybody has an experience with what you are talking about. That wild boar experience, my experience with wild boars was limited to me using blood samples in order to get DNA. But I have a chef who saw an actual wild boar, hunted an actual wild boar, killed and roasted one. I have people who eat it. I have people who read about it. We all have experience with one topic. So science communication has to go beyond giving information because really, is that what communication is all about? Let's take a look at what communication might be. If you take a look at this figure, you'll notice something. Right in the middle of this giant flower is the word understanding. Let's tackle just that. Communication is a long, network, large set of reactions, interactions, correlations, and causations. All of these interact. Let's just pick one, understanding. What can lead to one's understanding? You might have preformed opinions on an issue. You might have other issues in mind. The nature of the message that you are looking at can affect how you understand it. Your own educational background affects it. Your own culture even can change how you understand an issue. Here's an example. I do a lot of research in risk communication, especially typhoons and climate change. We traveled to the different provinces affected by Yolanda. And in one province, somewhere south, they said, "We don't understand what storm surge is. Why didn't you say tsunami?" And I thought naman, tsunami, hindi naman tsunami yun eh. But they said, and I never said that out loud because you never say that out loud in research. So they said, we watched a broadcast of Rojas Boulevard where you show the storm surge. It wasn't bad. It didn't look like what we got as a storm surge. You know what our storm surge looked like? It looked like a tsunami that they showed on TV that happened to Japan. If you read very carefully into how people understand knowledge and how they understand information and experience, you'll notice one thing. It's not about the language they speak. It's not about whether that knowledge is true or not. It's the fact that the experience does not match the memory. The experience doesn't match what they saw on television, labeled as storm surge. What they saw on TV, labeled as a tsunami, that's what matched the experience. Their culture, their vicarious experience fed into how they understood what a storm surge was. Now, that story isn't over. Let's go straight to another part of Luzon where we had a whole island say, we know what storm surge is. Don't translate it to Daluyong. We don't understand what that is. Take a look. It's the same country. Different understandings, different cultures, different islands, different ways, different languages. We are a diverse country. Even our levels of personal interest affect how we understand something. And guess what? Many more. There are so many more things that can affect our understanding of science communication. Now take note, this is just understanding. This is only one piece of the puzzle in communication. We haven't even gone toward action. Meaning, action as in, now that I understand something, what can I do about it? What will I do? Okay, so what? So what if we don't know how else to proceed? You've heard this a lot, but if people are aware, then they'll take action on something. Okay, I'm going to show you a photo. This is a burger. Nice burger. Some of you have not had a burger since the start of this quarantine. I don't know what queue we are in. CQ, GCQ, ECQ, barbecue. I don't know what part of quarantine we're in, but a lot of us know that burgers are not necessarily the best foods on earth. They're not nutritious, they have a lot of fat. Even if you use the leanest, best cuts of meat, they're dangerous to eat if you eat burgers every day or if you eat burgers a lot. Let me ask you, are you all aware that burgers are bad? And I'm going to ask you the next question. Because you are aware that burgers are bad, have you immediately stopped eating burgers? I guarantee you a lot of you are going to say no. But that is human experience. Awareness isn't always action. Understanding is not always translated into action. Awareness just means that you know something exists and that something is true. But awareness doesn't always lead to understanding, and understanding doesn't always need action. Action is driven by many things. You might have different sets of priorities, you might have a different environment. You might be stuck out in the middle of the province, and the only thing that you can eat at that moment is McDo. You might be stuck in the middle of the city. It's raining, and the only thing you can eat is Jollibee. I am not endorsing any of these brands, but I am using them as a springboard to talk about the fact that action can be driven by many different things, not just knowledge. Let's take a look at another myth of science communication. And before we do that, we have a word from our sponsors. We have another pause.
Okay, thank you very much for bearing with us as we address more technical issues. It seems that some or majority of our viewers on FB cannot view. Okay, so we will try to address this issue and maybe offer you a new link, okay, to this seminar. So hold on a bit while we once again play our AVP. Everyone, and yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our first digital workshop series for BCSP. We apologize and we'd like to thank everyone for bearing with us as we learn the ropes of this new way of communicating. And once again, we have a digital workshop series entitled Sci Conservation Communicating Conservation in the Age of Social Media. It is a 4-day online series, and we start it off today with a talk from an Ateneo de Manila University professor, Ma'am Inez Ponce, with her talk, Saysay and SciSci in SciComm. Okay, take it away, ma'am.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I'm going to start all the way from the top just so anyone who's coming into this talk will be able to get a full view of what happened. Hi, I am Inez Ponce de Leon, and I am an assistant professor at the Department of Communication of the Ateneo de Manila University. I am also a molecular biologist. Well, I was a molecular biologist for my undergraduate and my master's. In my master's, I specialized, or my thesis was in wildlife conservation genetics. I did work on wild pig species in the Philippines by doing some genetic analysis of two principal mitochondrial genes. For those of you who are not in the field, this just means looking at the genetic makeup of two genes in wild pig species in the Philippines. Why wild pig? They're in danger of extinction. We have some wild pig species that are rapidly running out in terms of population size in the Philippines. Why wild pig? Wild pigs are known as the garbage men of the forest. Somebody's going to correct me on this, I know. But they clean up the forest floor. They keep forest biodiversity intact and stable. Now, this is not the exact wild pig that I dealt with, but I did research on wild pig species and I like talking about it and I like talking about science in general. But here's the thing, this is the science that we are all used to as scientists. Science, Nature, all these big journals that bring science to our fellow scientists. Our fellow scientists, to some extent, understand our language. So we often talk to them the way that we would talk to fellow scientists or our students. Here is my information, let me give it to you. When we go out into the real world, lecturing doesn't always have that same. We don't lecture to our friends. We engage in conversations. And yet popular science communication still looks like a lecture. You have TED Talks, you have Neil deGrasse Tyson, you have blogs, websites, even Twitter that talk a lot about scientific facts. Now, why is this so important to understand and why is it so important to acknowledge? Science communication has actually been around since the 1800s when Michael Faraday and his friends wanted to talk about science communication to a wide range of people who by then were not under a standardized educational system. Today, people have some access to education. There are more people who are educated and literate, but we still follow the old let's give them information and let's make them act model. But science communication is bigger than this. It has changed since the 1800s, and we need to take more insights from the social sciences, of which communication is a part. And that's why this talk is entitled SciSci. SciSci meaning giving meaning, and SciSci, a partnership between the social sciences and the bench sciences or the laboratory sciences, because science communication goes beyond simply giving more people more information. Today, we are going to take a look at two major themes, the myths of science communication, and then we'll look at a few ground rules on how you can communicate science, whether it's in this quarantine season or offline. Let's talk about these myths. You might have heard them before, you might have used them before. Let's take a look at a list of these myths. You might have said that people just need more information, they might need to be more aware, they might need to just put stuff on Facebook, and after all of these, if they still don't listen, matigas lang talaga ulo nila. Let's take a look at these one by one. Let's start with information is all they need. Here's how it might sound. Science communication is giving information to those who don't know. I used to use this definition. when I was a science communication baby back in 2003, 2004. There's a problem with this statement. We might assume that we give information because people don't know anything about science. We also might assume that people need science alone in order to make a decision. And there's a third assumption. Communication is just about giving information. I entered graduate school as a PhD student thinking that this was communication. My very first day on the job in sociology, I was completely floored, literal floored, meaning lying on the floor crying, because I tried to read all the readings and I couldn't take it. It was difficult to understand what field I had gotten into. But look at me today. I am way too excited. In fact, I'll probably be jumping and dancing later because this field, I love talking about this. Science communication is not just about giving information. Let's take a look at what communication might look like. Let's start first with understanding, the construct of understanding. Because we often assume that giving people information means that they'll understand the info and then take action. But according to research, what goes into how people understand a message? If you give them information, they will take note of this information against other issues that are their priority. They might already have opinions on the issue. If they're not interested in the issue, they won't take time to understand it. They won't get information if the message is not something that they like to see or in a channel that they don't frequent. Their level of personal interest has some bearing on how they understand things. This, guess what, is just one, two, three, four, five, six. These are just six variables, and there are so many more. And guess what? This is just understanding. The path between understanding going all the way into action is so long. And I've seen a comment here, communication is an exchange. Great, that's good. But guess what? This is something we learned only now or only in the last decade. This is something emerging from the sciences and the social sciences in terms of science com, because science communication has been burdened by that label, giving science to the lay public. It takes away the exchange of communication that's supposed to happen. There's one thing that we're missing here. Ma'am, what about action? What can lead to people taking action? I hear this a lot, especially from my students who are taking up PR and similar fields in communication. Let's build awareness and people will take action. Okay, I'm going to show you a photo. This is a burger. I like burgers. I don't eat them every day. I don't know what part of the ECQ we're in right now. There's a Q in it, but I miss burgers. I know burgers are bad. Some of you already know that burgers are bad. You're aware that burgers are not good for you. Have you stopped eating burgers? You're aware that chips are not good for you. Have you stopped eating chips? This is just awareness. You're just aware that something is true. But have you taken action on it? You haven't. Because that is pretty much what awareness is. It's knowing the existence of. Action, however, is determined by so many other things. Priorities, emotions. I love burgers, emotions, memories, burgers, my childhood, experiences. I had a great experience eating two burgers at the same time, or in sequence, not at the same time. That would not make sense. But that's action for you. That's human experience, and we're all part of that. Now, awareness doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take action, but we also hear this. Give people the facts. Ay, hindi nakinig. Kasi ng ulo eh. You hear this a lot today. Matigas ang ulo ng tao, kaya hindi sila nakikinig. Okay, let's take a look very deeply at that statement. What does it really mean to be hard-headed? Hard-headed. Matigas ang ulo mo, and I have to say this in Tagalog like I'm getting mad at a kid. Matigas ang ulo mo kasi alam mo kung ano ang dapat gawin, hindi mo pa rin ginagawa. Let's translate that roughly into English. You know better, but you don't do it anyway. But how do we know we know better? How do we know that we're doing better? A lot of us are governed by experience. What if you have never experienced something before? None of us have experienced a pandemic of this size, of this shape, of COVID. We are told to do so many things, but there are some people who are not able to obey the orders because they've never experienced this before. There's not something to draw a memory from. We see this a lot, and I've seen this a lot in my research in risk communication, especially in flooding. People who have never experienced a flood before often don't listen to warnings because they don't have anything to draw action from. We often expect people to listen to the facts or to listen to information because that is how we are trained as scientists. We are trained to sit in a lecture room and then we take action. We take an exam. We do laboratory work. We do work in science. That's the action we take. And when we leave the classroom, we often expect people to take action on the facts. Here are the facts. Wait, why aren't you listening? Why aren't you obeying me? But is science really like that? Are the facts set in stone? Is science really all about obeying who is lecturing or listening, critiquing, questioning, and asking? So let's look at another myth aside from tigas kasi ng ulo. Because I will leave you with this question. We often blame the audience for not listening. So we treat people like children. Oh, okay, they're not listening to me. I treat people like children as well. This is how I talk. They're not listening to me. Let me give them access. I'm going to put everything on Facebook because everybody is on Facebook anyway. And I've been told this sometimes. Tell me how I can put something on Facebook. Lagay mo sa FB. Okay. There's an assumption built here. Everybody's on Facebook and that they will read Facebook the way that you will read Facebook. Meaning, people go to Facebook for information. Okay, point number one, not everyone is on Facebook. And not everyone who uses Facebook uses it to get information. A lot of people I know use Facebook as escape, meaning, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm sleepy. Let me go relax and look at a meme. Let me laugh at something. Imagine if you're escaping from something and all of a sudden information comes in. Information! I'm trying to rest, leave me alone. Facebook, social media, is not always used for information. It's not always used for news. We have such a varied audience out there. Not everyone will be on Facebook. Not everyone is going to listen to you on Facebook. Not everyone is going to be on the channel that you want. I've also been asked, why don't we just put infographics? Buy data plan. Your infographics, your Facebook will serve a specific kind of audience, but especially for biodiversity. And here is something that I have to stress with a whole other slide layout. You need to serve all your audiences, including those who might need your work the most. They are not always on Facebook. They're not on Twitter. They're not even online. They won't listen to a lecture. They won't listen to a class. You might need to talk to them, make an exchange, engage in conversations. Those of you who work in field work know this very well. You don't go into a community with a lecture. You go in as a friend. You don't leave the community as a lecturer. You leave as a member and you keep coming back. That's field work. We experience that as well in the social sciences. Those whom we serve are not always online and invisible. Those whom we serve, who are most affected by the issues of biodiversity, we need to reach out to them. And we often reach out to them in conversation, which is a kind of communication. So, what now? Don't fall for the myths. Facts are not the only way to get your point across. Experience will sometimes play a role in how people understand the information that you give. If your audience doesn't understand, avoid blaming the audience because there is very little you can do about the audience. But there is a lot that you can do about how you see that audience. So you have to go where your audience is. What does this mean for us if we have to go where the audience is? Let's acknowledge that science communication, first of all, has changed. from the 1800s and Michael Faraday and friends. Communication has changed because science is not always what people use in making decisions. They can use their experience and their emotions. Science communication rests in the bed of language, culture, psychology, politics, and philosophy. My special favorite, my special friend here is philo, followed by sociology, culture, and psychology. I love studying these four because they have bearing on how people understand science and how people use science. It's not intuitive. This is not just giving information about science. This can be an exchange, this can be an acknowledgement that people can know science differently from how you know it. It's not intuitive. And here's something that I always remind my students and my friends, it's not easy. Science comm takes a long time to hone because there are different ways of transmitting, conversing, and communicating science. Science communication might need more than just a lecture, and that's okay. It's difficult. That's okay. Let's take a look now at a few ground rules that might guide you. I'm going to go through these ground rules in the next few minutes. Here is a short top five. These are top five ground rules that I've developed along with the literature and research in the last few years, especially in science communication. I'm going to concentrate on these one by one. Let's start with, oh my gosh, don't simplify. Wait a minute. What do you mean, ma'am? Isn't science complex? Isn't science difficult? Yes, science is difficult. But let me ask you, especially for those of you who work in the lab, what do? You create experimental setups. You sit in a laboratory and remove the complexity of the world and remove all the extraneous variables that complicate your situation, that complicate your setup. Fieldwork goes into the complex. You might go into fieldwork and it's very hard to set up a laboratory in the field because you have so many variables. So you acknowledge all these variables. Science, by its nature, actually simplifies a lot of things. Science tries to block out some variables in favor of others, which is why you always hear the phrase, all things remaining equal, or controlling for. That means there are certain variables that you're controlling, but in real life, complex ang buhay. Whenever we think about science communication, I invite you not to look at science as having to be simplified, but instead look for a way for the science that you do to fit into the complexity of life. There's an advantage to this. Why? When you think of simplifying science, then you'll still run the risk of oversimplification. Let's not think about oversimplification. Go turn the other way. Go to the complexity. Think, where does your science fit in? In my case, I did work on wild pigs and I did a lot of genetic studies and PCR on wild pigs. The so what of that is it's biodiversity, it's about conservation, it's about how different islands in the Philippines have different species, and that has meaning for policy making. Policy making is complex, so is real life, but we have to find a way to fit science into complexity. When you think in this way, science doesn't just become a disembodied set of facts. Science becomes facts set in stone plus a whole world behind it. Because facts can change. What remains the same? The process. You'll have to acknowledge that science itself is complicated, but that this complication has meaning. All your facts have context. Every research in science, every project has some degree of uncertainty. The term uncertainty here is used very differently from the way uncertainty is used in the real world. Uncertainty doesn't mean we don't know. Uncertainty can mean we have so many different scenarios. We know all about these scenarios. We're not sure which one is true, but we'll keep on doing research until we can establish some degree of truth. That's uncertainty. All research has it. We work under correlation. We're not sure about cause. This is built into all of the sciences. We have always p-value less than 0.00000000001, maybe. In the social sciences, 0.05 is fine for us. What am I talking about? Goodness, these are all stats, and they're built into scientific work because we are showing that research is always needed. Hence, long-term work, meaning what? Long-term work, science never ends. We keep on doing research. What is true now might not be true in the future, but what will always be true? Our commitment to finding the truth using systematic, logical research. That is how science operates. So whenever people ask, science is a body of knowledge, isn't that right? My answer is, it's not just a body of facts, because you make science sound like a textbook. You make science sound like a recipe book. Science is a set of practices, human practices to look for truth. And these human practices are governed by systematic and logical steps. So, in a nutshell, find a way to fit science into the real world. If you're doing reports on science, find your way to connect your research to real life. Answer this question: why should anyone study this? What value are we getting out of it? And then separate. Look at your findings. What do your findings mean? So you're looking at this from a timeline. Why should you study it? Look, significance, relevance, and importance of your statement. That's your introduction. Then, what do your findings mean? These are the implications. Who is going to use these findings? Try to answer these questions from the point of view of someone who is not a scientist. And whatever you do, do not use the term layman. We don't use that term in science anymore. I mistakenly used that at a science conference 2 years ago. The look on people's faces, oh my goodness, they were so mad at me. So non-scientists, people who are not in your field. Let's take a look at another point here. Instead of simplifying, find a way to fit science into complexity, but don't talk down to people or don't be condescending. There is an opposite here. Don't talk up or buttering up people or flattering them. These are two different ways of talking. You might have recognized them. Talking up is not that common. Talking down is very common. Here's how you might hear them. Talking down or condescending is when you tell people that you probably won't understand this. Let me simplify it for you. Flattering, talking up. Oh, you probably know about this. Let me talk more. Let's make your work based on science. Why are these um, so important? They're just phrases, right? They also they do two things. They change mindsets on opposite sides of this communication divide. If you as the speaker keep on thinking in terms of let me make this simple for you, you're also building in the assumption that your audience is simple-minded and needs only you as its source of information. When you say, I'm sure you think this is complicated, you're making assumptions about your audience. The same thing happens when you're talking up. I know you already know a lot about this. Again, making an assumption, or let's make your work based on science. Bakit? Bakit science? Bakit kailangan? Is it the only legitimate field out there or the legitimate field of inquiry and knowledge? Let's try not to minimize, to delimit our audience. Let's not make their knowledge small. They know something. And it pays that we understand them and make no assumptions about that audience. This plays more into how you talk, so make no assumptions about that audience even before you make your presentation or you make your report. First, there are things that you need to ask about your audience, but I would advise do not rely on demographics. A lot of I've heard this before. I work in design thinking or trying to design in terms of what people need, and sometimes my students or my friends would present data And they'd say, oh, half of this audience is male and half is female. We want to reach out to the females. They're all housewives. So let's make our slides pink. Like, oh my God, why? This is not about that. You end up stereotyping. Try to find research or ask your audience. Try to design a questionnaire or a survey. This is not just about how old they are, what generation they're from, what colors they like, or what their jobs are. If you're talking to a specific group, be very specific as well. What are their priorities? What are their concerns? If you can't find out what those priorities and concerns are very quickly without asking, try to answer this question. How might your research benefit a very specific group? And what exact need will you meet? I ask this a lot, and I don't know if I have some students on the chat box or in the comments or who are watching this on streaming. But if you are my research student, you recognize this question. We have an exam always in the middle of the semester, and I always ask this very specific question. And you get a 0 if you answer with, other researchers can use this in order to further their studies. Really? There are thousands of different researchers all over the world and thousands of different studies. What study am I going to put your research into? Be very specific. What kind of professional is going to benefit? What needs are you going to meet? This helps you write your thesis as well. So for those of you who are writing the thesis, this is going to help you. There are two scenarios here because communication can be oral and written. Let's pretend you are the speaker. Now you have to talk to an audience. A lot of them are used to teaching, but if you're outside and not in a classroom, the nature of that audience changes. You're not going to face an audience of preschool kids. And why do I say preschool kids? These are not just students who are going to listen to you and absorb everything. You're going to need to find some form of middle ground and some form of exchange with uh, your audience. Your people in the audience are not just blank slates. They can be a group of adults that have some knowledge and experience on your topic. And this audience might have its own set of ways, or sorry, as a way of understanding the sciences, a way of understanding the topic that you're going to talk about. You, as the speaker, have that job to find out what does your audience know? What is the expertise of your audience? What does it want to find out more about? What is its experience? Where has it been? These are the questions that you'll need to ask about your audience rather than what should I talk about. Remember, it's not about you, it's about what your audience might be looking for. And this can be varied, it might be vastly different from what you are used to and what you might expect. There's another scenario. You are the researcher who is the beneficiary, and this might work better if you are writing about research. Again, let's not rely on demographics and don't think that the person that you're talking to has absolutely no knowledge or experience. You'll have to ask the specific person that your research will benefit and what exact need you're going to meet in terms of your research. Again, think of this as an exam question where you have to be very specific because you also have to acknowledge that there are needs that you cannot meet. Think of this as scope and limitations. There are questions you cannot answer, therefore you're not going to meet all the needs of your beneficiary. Let's now take a look at may I have the next slide? Yes. Let's now take a look at ways that you can tell stories. All human beings love stories. Most of my research students know this. In class, we all have to tell each other stories. All research tells a good story, even scientific research from beginning to end. What's the story like? Here's the past research. Here's what we know. We don't know about something. Let me tell you about what I found out. Here's how I went on my adventure. Adventure talaga. Here's how I went on my adventure in order to find out more and in order to answer my question. Here are the guesses I made. Oh, look, here's what I found. Maybe this is what it means. If you want to find out more, go do your own research. That is your story. But take a look at this. Science is not product. It's a process. It's a logical process. We're not just here to create results. We're not just here to feed into technology or to have findings. We never say, I therefore conclude 100%. Science never ends. It is a never ending process. Talk to us about that process. If you are doing this, whether you're writing or telling the story, tell us what exactly did you go through? You don't have to talk about all the nitty gritties and all the bureaucracy and all the papers, but you have to tell us step by step as much as you can. Not necessarily bit by bit, but what are the steps that you went through in order to answer your question? This is our motto whenever we assess thesis and research in communication. Recipe means replicability, meaning if I take your dissertation, if I take your thesis and just pull out chapter 3, your methods, I should be able to replicate your work, meaning your recipe has to be written so well anyone can do the exact same thing, can replicate your work without asking you questions, and you'll still be able, that person will be able to get maybe to some degree the same answers, the same findings that you got. Tell us your story. What does it mean if you have to report? Don't just say, here's what I found. Don't be afraid to talk about your process, but make it easy to digest. Here's a tip. If you are doing this with a PowerPoint presentation like I am right now, if you're doing this for writing, go for something visual, maybe a flowchart. A flowchart can help your reader see, or your reader, your listener, your viewer, see step by step what you did. And if you can, along with that flowchart, show what each part of the flowchart or what each step meant and why it was needed. In the social sciences, we do this by aligning our flowchart with our theoretical framework so that people know which part of our theory was being addressed. For some of the sciences, especially the environmental sciences, you might want to do this with your conceptual framework. But a flowchart is easy to digest because this is literally the step-by-step process that you went through. I agree, it's very hard to do a step-by-step process, especially if you have to look back on your work and look at everything that you did. But it also helps you look back on your work and document it and see logically what steps you went through and maybe where you could have gone wrong or where you could have improved. And when you do this, you also will be able to write your implication section. Now I'm teaching how to write the thesis. Awesome. Okay, let's take a look at another technique that we like using. I'm a writer, and my motto in life is show, don't tell. People are visual, they're very experience based. They like images not because people don't like text, but because images awaken the imagination. Text does not. So, how do you work around this if you don't have data, if you don't have photos? You make your writing tell a story. You play with metaphors and analogies. You play with comparisons. Here's an exercise that I like to give all my students when we do radio broadcasts. And this is very Filipino specific. Pretend you're on the radio and you now have to describe, not just say, describe how long is EDSA? How long is Epifanio de los Santos Avenue from end to end? Without using kilometers, without using any unit of measurement that is usual for people. You can do the same exercise with forest cover. How many hectares? But don't use the word hectares. Don't use any kind of measurement. Use an object. So for EDSA, I don't know if I have this right. 6 kilometers? No, probably not. Someone's going to correct me on this. I'm not looking at the comments box. But how many cars would this be end to end? Given that you have 4 meters average ang car natin sa Pilipinas. I forgot. I know I calculated this, but try that. How would you describe EDSA without using kilometers? How would you describe forest cover without using hectares? How would you describe the volume of people in Manila without using numbers of people? Why is this important? When we are doing science in journals, we tend to use figures and charts. But when you have to work with non-scientific audiences, numbers are not very easy to digest. Numbers don't translate into visuals, they don't translate into an imagination. You need an analogy or a metaphor. Here are a few techniques that you might want to use. On the next slide, you'll see that there are some guide questions that can help you. When you talk about individual numbers, try to resist uh, talking about try to resist putting them just into charts or into graphs. Try to talk about them. Try to find analogies. Think, what context matches those who are listening to me? This is why you'll hear pag-asa say, isang malaking timba ng tubig sa isang oras. Because that's very visual. But then, of course, that's very difficult because my timba is not your timba. My barometer is not your barometer. Ilang basketball court. See, that one doesn't change. But you can now imagine 20 basketball courts worth of people packed into one place. Imagine that. Here's another that my students have used and I found very effective. Ilang Araneta Coliseum yan. So you're going to find out how many people can fit into Araneta, and then you're going to translate that into maybe whatever population you're trying to analyze. Ilang jeep, ilang bus. If you go out in the country, you'll have very different contexts. So I'm talking about a very Metro Manila context. You'll have to find this out if you're going to travel to different places or if you're addressing people in different contexts. Um, Now, may I see the next slide, because I'm getting questions from the audience, and I will answer these in a few minutes if that's okay. So I'm going to go into a recap first before I answer questions. Let's think in terms of not simplifying first. Think in terms of putting your story into the complexity. Think of your audience as your equal. They have stories, you have to learn from them. Make no assumptions about them, but tell a story that you hope comes from their perspective and try to paint them a picture. Okay, before I go into my final slide, I'm going to answer a few questions that are coming in into from the comments. I have one question. Oh, this is interesting. Do you have, this is from M. Lastica, who is from UPLB. I think I know Dr. Lastica. Hi. Do you have a gender mainstreaming checklist for projects? I find that they apply even in the most unlikely research topics. Okay. The gender mainstreaming, okay, I don't know if we're using the same language, but um, I might need to ask for some clarification as to what you mean by gender mainstreaming, as in, are we being inclusive of all genders, men and women? We used to have a checklist, but the thing is, we don't use just gender. The thing is, I don't deal with different genders. I deal more with different ages of audiences. Like, I look at younger versus older audiences. I might not be the best person to ask about gender mainstreaming and being inclusive in terms of gender. We don't usually use a checklist because this checklist can change. But what I do is I do more research on the community itself. So if I'm going to do projects that have to do, if I'm going to engage in a project that has to do with the community, I'm going to have to look into the characteristics of that community rather than start from a position of gender without going into the community first. But I could point you after this presentation, I could point you to some references. You just have to look for them on gender mainstreaming, because this is a very different construct, and it's a different side of science com that I am not an expert in. I know more. I have colleagues who are better experts at gender mainstreaming. I'll move to the next question. How do we prepare slides to better support, sorry, let me give the name. Sorry, this is from Paolo Pagaduan. How do we prepare slides to better support our presentations, particularly now that we are all online and cannot get cues from the audience for feedback? Oh, goodness, this is a good question. But guess what? It also applies because whenever you prepare your slides anyway, in any situation, you don't have your audience right next to you. Whether you're going to present this online or offline, you don't have your audience next to you. You always have you, just you and the slides. So my tip for you is, wow, my tip for you is, this sounds like I'm on a YouTube channel. My tip here is, you'll still need the ground rules. You'll have to assume that your audience knows some form of something. It has some knowledge, it has some idea of what you're talking about, but it will come from a different perspective. It helps, and I don't know if this is going to work for you, but it helps if you have a lot of friends who come from that audience. For this talk, to make this presentation, I talked to Giselle and Cynthia, who are part of the organizing committee, but I also talked to some of my students who are environmental scientists, and I got some ideas from them. So one way that you can do this is to tap your friends. And the advantage is that we're all online, or a lot of us are online. Talk to your friends who are as close as possible to the audience that you're going to address, so that you can get ideas from them on how you can address the needs of the audience. You'll need to be proactive rather than reactive. So you'll need to be proactive, such that you need to get questions from the audience even before you address the audience. And you have to be open to the critique that comes after, the feedback from the audience, because your proactivity can only go so far. When you get to that audience itself, you're going to find that a lot of your assumptions were completely wrong, and things can go wrong. So you'll have to keep on adapting to the critique, to the loss of internet, to the loss of broadcast. There's so many things you need to adapt to, but you get better at it. So when you prepare slides, be both proactive and reactive. Here's a tip that I'd like to share with all of you. When you prepare slides, do not prepare for slides. What? Okay. There was a time when public speaking did not have PowerPoint to go along with it, but you still have to be an effective speaker even without the slides. When you prepare your slides, they have to be a visual aid, not a visual crutch, meaning you shouldn't rely on them. So when you're preparing your slides, prepare as though one time, anytime, they could be yanked away from you and you're the only one talking to your audience. That's one way to address your audience. Now you're going to talk to them as equals. You don't talk to them with a blackboard, whiteboard, or slides, and you're proactive. I hope I answered your question. I have a lot more tips, but goodness, I really don't have a lot of time. Hold on, really quickly. Oh, Jamie. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Jamie Jimenez. Shout out. What would you say to other scientists who don't conform to this new and emerging approach to science com, yet you have to work with them? Very good question. Oh, this is really difficult. Yeah. I don't know how to answer this because most of the scientists that I've worked with eventually learned to adapt to this new mode of science communication. Uh, I speak to them two ways: point of research and point of experience. Point of research. A lot of scientists will always respond to prior research, and a lot of the research really does show people don't respond well to lectures, and everything comes from their culture and their experience. That research stretches all the way back to the 70s and 80s after the Cold War. 1991 is the first documented for typhoon, flooding, and people's reactions to weather warnings. They don't listen to what the experts say unless they have an experience to back up what the experts say. That's research. Point number two, let them talk to people and let them interact with people. That experience teaches them that teaching is not the only way to communicate. Because then they realize, oh, my experience also changes the way I communicate. Those are two ways, and there are many ways, I'm sure. So I have, this is still going to change. The way that the ground rules can change, this is still going to change. From Ed Ibanez, do I eat pork? Yes, I do. I love pork. Do I prefer lechon? Yes, I prefer actually any kind of lechon. Kahit lechong papel pa yan, kakainin ko yan. Aside from conservation, who is the beneficiary of your research study of wild pigs? You know what? I never got to go far in that study. I wish someone would continue that study. But let me give you this. I hoped it benefited my laboratory. Oh dear, here's the cop out. Researchers who want to do conservation and other species. Because I designed my own PCR primers using techniques that were documented in the literature but not optimized for the Philippine audience. So I hope that those techniques could carry over to other people who are doing conservation studies. I have some of those I how do you call I hate to say the bank, gene bank, gen bank. I have DNA sequences deposited in gen bank under my name. I hope people can use them in order to forward conservation studies in the Philippines. Because when I did that work, I found that we have different species on every island, and I hope someone does more work on those because I miss the lab sometimes. Have you included warty pigs? Yes, Susebifrons. Wait, that's Visayan warty pig. Thank you. Ed Ibanez tour guide. Awesome. Um, yes, I included Susebifrons. It was the most divergent of the species, 92% gene match for two mitochondrial genes. It's probably a whole species altogether. And I think the threat of extinction will be much higher for it. Question from Alon Velasquez, MS student, UPLB. Hi, I'm so happy we have a lot of UPLB people. I used to work in a place near UPLB. Science is a very important tool in policymaking. Yes, it is, along with technology.
Very, very interesting questions. Unfortunately, we are running short on time, and I'm sure our speaker would be very willing to address your questions in the comments page. Okay, so watch out for that. Thank you very much to all those who posted questions, and continue doing so. We will do our best to reply. I think Ma'am Inez got disconnected. Okay, so many things to take away from this talk, and I don't know about you, but my notepad is full of them, and I'd like to share with you one that struck me, which is science is not a product, but a set of practices in search of truth. And to which I'd like to add, and the truth is out there. It's not in our tables and graphs, it's not in our indices and significant differences. So we have to take the time to get to know, okay, the stakeholders, to really live with them, to eat with them, to maybe even be, to commune with them, so that what we have in our tables and graphs makes sense. Okay, so it is our job as scientists to answer the bottom line, and usually the bottom line is very simple. We have to answer, so what? Okay, it's not enough to prove that so and so is significantly different from so and so. We have to answer the so what, which is coming from our stakeholders. Very, very challenging indeed to translate data into something that makes sense to the indigenous kaingero, to the subsistence fisherman, and even to that call center agent who lives next door. And very relevant nowadays, now that information does not necessarily translate into action. I mean, so many people still not wearing masks, right? But then again, that is another session. Okay, Ma'am Inez is not yet back in. May we proceed with some reminders? Okay, we'd like to, yeah, okay. We'd like to invite everyone to attend or to mark your calendars for the next topic tomorrow, same time, same channel. Okay, another very, very interesting topic for everyone to learn from. Okay, we have video storytelling for conservation. Indeed, learning to communicate your science, your kind of science, is very relevant nowadays. I mean, communicating on a daily basis is hard enough as it is, but communicating via screen most of the time is another level altogether. So it's time to level up, folks. I sort of got hit by that question of how do we deal with the older generation. Well, I am learning. Okay. And so we invite everyone to once again log in at 10 a.m. for the next talk in this digital series. And another reminder for those of you who would like to claim the e-certificates, okay, to please answer the survey. The link is posted there, I believe, in our FB page before 8 a.m. tomorrow, July 27. Okay, and if you are late, you will have to submit a 10-page essay explaining why. Okay, so 8 a.m. tomorrow, kindly submit your answer to your survey. I guess we could move on to awarding the certificate. Even if Mom Inez is not connected, I'm sure she will appreciate when she views the recording. Okay, may we have the certificate, please? Okay. Oh, I see. Mom Inez is trying to get back online. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to invite everyone to our online forum again. This series is a sort of a substitute, a very timely one to our annual symposium. Okay. We were very much saddened by the fact that we could not see each other live and share ideas. But this one, okay, this one is very, very nice, a very nice opportunity as well to learn new things, to flex those muscles maybe that we haven't been using quite a bit. It's time to learn new tricks, okay? Learning how to use Zoom, Google Meet, StreamYard, etc. in reaching out to those that matter, okay? Again, yeah, I also like the fact that Ma'am Inez emphasized, no, that democratizing knowledge. No? So everyone has a stake, and it's very thought provoking. This talk, I myself, I was wondering who owns or who holds the podium when it comes to communication or to truth. No, take for example the issue on eating dogs. uh, our friends up north would maintain that it's part of our culture and there's nothing wrong with it, while those of course who love our canine friends have something else to say altogether. So it's very nice how to learn to make ends meet, so to speak, to bring all the people in a common platform so we can resolve issues such as this. Okay, welcome back, Manines. We missed you.
Hi! Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
See,
There was a
this
very
day is full of adventures.
there was a
Okay.
very nice question for you, and I'm sure it will be very, very interesting to answer. But unfortunately, our time is running short. But let me just
Yeah, sorry.
question. And the question was how to be you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, as I was coming in, I
Siguro,
was reading. Yeah. Sorry, can I as I was
yes.
reading, sorry, I'm going to go real quickly because I saw some interesting questions. But
Yes. Go
someone
ahead.
said,
Okay. Maybe
yeah,
just one
sorry,
last.
very
Okay.
quickly. Yeah, okay, very quickly. To Alon, I love your name. To Alon, trust me, you have not exhausted all places yet. If you can't influence policymakers, try to influence people who work with policymakers, like NGOs, anyone who can influence policy. And again, we go back to it's not knowledge that drives action. Even if they know, they will not take action. Not always. So be very careful lang. Careful lang. Um, sorry, I'm going to. Someone kasi asked a very pointed question, and I like this. Make no assumptions about your audience. How will you have an idea of their perspective if you don't make assumptions? Okay, uh, When I say make no assumptions about your audience, instead of saying, babae sila, therefore they'll be concerned about childbirth, or lalaki sila, therefore they like basketball. I hear that a lot because we can make those assumptions quickly as a mental shortcut in order to make our slides, but it's not always the case. So when I say when you make assumptions, it's more of you're making assumptions by putting interests or agenda into your audience, rather than asking the audience what exactly they're interested in. So that's what it meant. And finally, it's the gender inclusivity. Yes, from Emilia Lastica, gender mainstreaming. Yes, to see that the project is inclusive. Again, I would love to get in touch with you about this because it's not my field. I know some people who are working in this. Um, I know some people who work in this better than I. So I can't answer that right now. Um, thesis thesis and research needs to be technically written. How do we not simplify? When I say not simplify when you write an abstract, it's more of don't put just facts in your abstract. When you write an abstract, take note your audience for the abstract is also a scientist, so you are allowed to talk about technical terms, you are allowed to simplify for another scientist. But when I say don't simplify, it's more of if you're talking to a non-scientist, fit into their world. Don't strip your facts bare of their context. No fact exists as an objective fact. All facts exist within a context. Bring in that context. Try to find the context of the people that you talk to. Uh, I hope that answered all the questions. I'm sorry, I might have missed one or two because I was scrolling very quickly. How to be me? No, don't be me. Be yourself. Be the best version of you. And I'm how to be me? Don't. Kawawa ka naman pag dumami yung minions ko. But yeah, just be the best version of yourself.
So once again, thank you very much to all those who participated in our forum, and I'm sure Ma'am Inez would try and take the time to continue answering your questions in our FB page. If not, you
Yes,
can
I will.
always reach out to her via email or some other way in order to continue sharing ideas, because that's really the bottom line. We need to share ideas, okay? And we'd like to officially thank our speaker with the following certificate. Yes, okay. This certificate of appreciation is formally given to Ma'am Inez Ponce de Leon in grateful recognition for your invaluable contribution to BCSP's Biodiversity Online Digital Workshop series through your talk entitled Saysay and SciSci in SciComm. Lessons from the Social Sciences in Giving Your Science Its Day in the Sun. Okay, given on the 27th of July, 2020. Okay, thank you very much once again, Ma'am
Thank you
Inez.
so much.
Okay, and we are very glad to have you with us. Reminding everyone about our forum, online forum for students who would like to present their research. It happens on August 22 to 23. For participants, there is no need to register. It's free. Okay, and then a quick word on our sponsors. We would like once again to acknowledge the help of, do we have that slide? Okay. Yes. Okay. We would like to acknowledge the help of Biodiversity Management Bureau, Team Energy Foundation, Energy Development Corporation, and Crocodilus Porosus Philippines. Okay, and thank you so much for bearing with us through those several episodes of technical glitches as we try to come to grips with the new normal. And we hope to, in spite of that, see all of you again in the next session. Signing out.